Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join Cardboard Coach 1 and Cardboard Coach 2 together in this holy matrimony. If there's any objections to these two cardboard coaches being hitched, speak now or forever hold your peace. Let's talk about hitches.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Oh, baby, I love you. Oh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? In today's video, I want to talk about hitches. So let's get right into it. All right. First time here, make sure you like and subscribe. Do all that stuff downstairs. I do appreciate that, and it does help me out. Okay, so today's episode, I've actually been holding off on this for a long time because I have really grand ideas of what this is going to be and like all these cool things to do. And of course, that means I don't get them ready in time, and I don't have this and I don't have that, and it causes me to keep pushing these episodes further and further and further back, and probably just never execute on them. So today is the day I'm like, you know what? I just need to go through with this. The hitch of a roller coaster is one of the most basic things out there that I feel everyone should know more about. It's a fun little component in the train, and there's lots of different ways manufacturers do these things. So I wanted to do a video about it. Okay, so way back when roller coasters first started, they were pretty much one coach, just went around up and down the track, and that was it. When you added a second coach, there needed to be some way to couple the coaches together. So there wasn't a great many devices that did that. So the first ones were actually pretty simple. The first hitches were actually just chain. That's all they were. They were simply just a piece of chain draped between the two coaches, and that was it. The coaches had a little bit of shock absorber because chains don't actually space the coaches out at all. So there was a little bit of shock absorber put in there and some bumper pads so the coaches could bump into each other, and that's because they have to turn. So moving from that, we have the basic hitch. So let's start with our cardboard coaches and get those cut out. Okay, so I've made my little cardboard coaches. Here they are. Here's coach number 1 and coach number 2, and they've been joined together with a hitch in the center. So what the hitch allows the ride to do, as it goes out, the ride's allowed to go down. Typically, a lot of them start with a little dip that goes down the hill, right? So that allows the ride to go out, and it allows the ride to... Okay. It's got to bend. This can't bend. All right, let's try this. All right, now through the magic of cardboard creation and some help to some oversized wood screws. If I could do this right here. Yep. This is getting jankier by the second. All right, we now have our two hitches right here, our hitch between two coaches, and now the coach can bend. Whoa, we can now follow the track up and down. So the hitch allows the train, the two trains or two coaches put together, to do multiple axes. So as you can see, like, it allows it to fall up and down. This is needed for going up a loop or down a drop or up a lift hill. First thing you do when you get on a ride is it typically goes up the lift hill, and then it's followed by it, right? So that is the thing that the hitch does. The next thing it does is it allows the thing to turn. You're kidding me. Okay, we're back at this here. Sorry about that. Through the amazing technological breakthroughs of cardboard innovation, we now have our two coaches again. And so the hitch is allowed to turn the coach up and down like this. All right, and now looking at it from the top, When you go around a corner, so you got up and down this way, so now when you go around a corner, the hitches have to be able to twist like this. So that is what this second one right back here next to my finger, that's what that has been added for. That allows the coaches to turn left and to right. And then when you look at it this way, you need to be able to twist, which is sometimes roller coaster fabricating sounds like duct tape. I never thought I'd be sitting around 6 years after I left the industry building hitches out of cardboard. But here I am. And lucky for you guys too. Okay, cardboard coaster 3.0, right? Okay, so now with the invention of this little guy right there at the end, if you can see it. Okay, so now with the invention of this little guy right here at the end, now I could take my two coaches again, and we can now go on the lift hill, going this way, okay? From the top of the track, we can go ahead and make that left and right-hand turn going this way. And now, when we go into a corkscrew, we can now twist the coaches one way or the other. My cardboard holds up right. We can now twist the coaches one way or another by this link in the back. So we have a total of 1, 2, 3 axes we have to deal with. There's a much simpler form for this. And a lot of you probably already have it in the garage outside. And that is a universal. That's what these guys are called. This is a universal drive that you'd find in a socket set. So universal, some people, like I've worked with crews that called these wobblies as well. The wobbly, or universal, is a very simple design. It's a very simple design, but it does exactly what we need it to do. It allows a ride to pivot up and down. It also allows a ride to pivot left and right. So if you look at it, you go left, right, and then up and down. Now, you have on these, you can get an extension. Simply plug them in. And now if I take the extension, I could hold one side solid and just loosely grip the other side, and the loose grip will allow this whole assembly to twist. That's your axis rotation right there. So you can essentially move it in any direction like that now. Now this is the closest thing we have to mimicking an old style hitch on a roller coaster. If I were to put this in the cardboard coaster 3.0, okay, I put this in my cardboard coaster 4.0 now. Now, the way I've taped it in is the front is taped solid in there, so it's not going anywhere. The rear, I've actually used tape backwards and a sleeve, so it can slide in here now. Now, we would stop this so where it didn't go anywhere, but essentially, I can take that universal in the center, and then we could still move left to right, up and down, but then because that sleeve, I can now twist this rear coach any way I wanted to. So if I needed to go up into a corkscrew, I could do that. If I just need to go up into a loop or down, maybe twist it into a dive roll, something like that, I can do that because this whole thing works that way now. So that is your basic roller coaster hitch right there. Now, what type of design flaws does this have? Well, actually right here, in the pins to the 2-axis block right there, those pins can wear down. They need grease constantly, and those pins can wear down. And what happens is when those pins wear down, this whole assembly becomes loose. and then the coach could start flopping up and down and start going left and right, and it starts doing unintended movement, which comes out in the form of vibration as you're out there on the track. So sometimes vibration and funny feelings can actually be caused by loose hitch assemblies. Now, when I say loose, there's nothing I can do to tighten this assembly up. It's all just dimensions and steel. So one of the things that we have to do during refurbishment is we will take this little block out of there. We will take that 2-axis block out of there. At least 2-axis is what Vekoma calls them. We'll take that 2-axis block out of there, and it will have a set of brass bushings on the inside. We'll take those bushings out and replace them with brand new ones. The hitch pins that go through either side, top to bottom or left to right, we can replace those when they become worn. But typically with the cost of this equipment, unless it measures worn, you typically don't replace them. They are allowed some wear on them, but not much. So what are some of those things? What's some of the benefits of having that? Well, this style right here of hitch that I've done, this is called a trailer hitch assembly. Now, the reason for that is because on the trailer hitch, my coach number 2 is now mounted to coach number 1. Coach number 1 will have 4 wheels on it. Let's just keep it simple and stick with road wheels, right? It'll have 4 road wheels. 1, 2, 3, 4 road wheels on that assembly. Coach number 2 will only have 2 road wheels just on the back. It doesn't need the front 2 because it's hitched into there. So this coach rests on top of that one, and so on and so forth all the way back. Now, older rides and let's say your skyrocket rides, like premier builds, they still use a coach with 4 wheels on the front and 4 wheels on the back. And then what's in the middle between the two is this exact same assembly, but instead of it being solid, taking its weight through there, it actually has 2 sets of universal joints. There's one on the front side and one on the back side, and what you're left with is simply just a hitch bar between the two. The hitch bar is an older style, and that was when they were still using coaches with full wheels on each coach. Now, what's some of the disadvantage of doing that? Well, using 4 sets of wheel carriers per coach adds a lot of drag to the assemblies, so the train moves slower out there on the track. The other thing that it does is that it makes the length of the train longer. Most all of your old Woody, Philadelphia Toboggan Company and things like that, they would use a hitch bar between the 2 coaches because they wanted to run 3 sets of coaches and it was too much weight to push up on there. Now, what's some of the disadvantages of using a singular hitch style like that where it trailer hitches off of the coach in front of it? Well, you now start to chordal. So instead of this coach and this coach acting independently and fluidly with each other, you've taken all the geometry of coach number 1 and linked it to coach number 2. And now coach number 2's geometry is different than coach number 1. So the thing chordals more. So it takes more geometry to go around the corner. When you twist it left and right, like on top like that, see the 2 coaches touching each other? That's the chordaling effect. You can only go so far. That's the reason why there's a lot of design space between coaches. You can only go so far until those 2 coaches touch each other. So the nice thing about the hitch bar styles is that allows the coach to be much further back. And they could do much sharper turns. Granted, the only place you would ever need to do sharp turns is at very low speeds in the station and things like that. But that's the way the hitch bars are. The Premier coasters, old arrows, very old, like I can think of like a Big Thunder Mountain at Disneyland, Matterhorn bobsled at Disneyland, things like that used a hitch bar. Some wooden roller coasters, Philadelphia Toboggan Company, still use hitch bars between them. I know I've ridden on a handful of them. But how do we improve on this design? How do we make this better to where we say we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6 components in here that can wear down. How do we make it to where these 6 components don't wear down anymore? It's like, well, we could turn them all into 2 components. All right, how do we do that? What is that? Well, that's this guy right here. This is a spherical rod end, or as most of us know them, a heim joint. This spherical rod end allows the same access of movement in all way. If I put my finger in and call it the hitch pin, this would be off the front of the coach. What design revision am I up to? Let's see, I think I just did design revision 4. All right, I lost track of what I said earlier. Where am I? Design revision 4, I think. Okay, so here's design revision 4. Now I've taken my rod end, essentially, and put it on the front of my coach. And then the back of my coach now has this opening looking fork right here looking thing that I'm going to poorly fit into. Of course, this is cardboard, and I'm using an extension. I don't have anything better than this extension to put in there.
Giggity!
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the two together like this and put my extension through it. If I could do this. Maybe. Aha! I can. Alright. So here is the style hitch that most rides are now using. So we went from the hitch bar, which was kind of like our very early models. Then we've gone to a 2-axis block, which is essentially your hitch bar minus the universal on each end. It now just has one. So we're now into the spherical rod end like it sits right now on both sides. Now the rod end is able to do plenty of stuff. Now I could take it. Now when I pivot this, it's because of the poor fit up of cardboard and steel put together. Because of that poor fit up, right now it's actually pivoting on the extension in the center. But the actual ride, if I clamp these two pieces together, just like this, it'll pivot on that ball in the center, if you could see that. So it'll pivot on that ball in the center, like that. And it will also allow it to twist left and right, like that. And because it can twist and pivot, that means it can already go in all directions that it needs to go. So the hitch ball type like this with that spherical rod end, this is the far superior joint. Not to mention these guys, there's hardly any play with them at all. There's really nothing inside there. The big ones, the style that I'm really familiar with, like Intamin style, Intamin inside where that ball sits actually has consumable inserts on the inside where I could take those inserts out and replace them and put them back together. And then this assembly would be tightened back up again. There's not a lot of drawbacks to these at all, other than the components are much larger, and when they do go bad or when they get scarred, typically someone hits it or drops something on it, they have to be replaced, and they are super expensive, super long lead time items. So that is the only downside. The smaller pin and universal joint style, like we have on the older style of Vekomas, or two of them, one on each end to make a hitch bar, these guys are very simple. The parts are very small. They're easy to stock. I can actually have multiple of these components in there. But this style is definitely much tighter and more precise. Why would we care about precision? Because this piece in the center, that is what guides the coaches from one to the other. So when you're talking about rides like linear inductive rides or linear synchronous rides where they have a set of forks sticking down underneath there that have to go either over magnets or a fin that has to slide through stators, you're talking this dimension left to right can't move at all. It has to be locked into place. In fact, on the Intamin rides, when we would do that, since the rear has the wheel carriers and that would be shimmed left to right to make the fins go down the track, the front didn't have that. So you would space the rear of this train, the coach in front of it, to get that aligned. Then you would do this one to get this aligned. And if the fins at the very front of this coach were too far off one direction, you would have to actually remove the hitch pin and add shims to one side and space this hitch physically over to the other side to align the fins on the front of that other train. Typically, once that's done and set, it doesn't move. Like, you do that once when the train is like brand new, and after that, you just know X amount of shims, that little pack of shims, stays in that particular coach, and all the fins and all this extra componentry, everything gets married together at that point and stays still. That way, the geometry never changes as the ride progresses through its lifetime. So that is the 3 basic styles of hitches. You have the hitch bar, your 2-axis block, and your spherical rod end like that, or your ball joint style. There's some different components and different things you can call each one of them, like the piece here on this universal or 2-axis block right here. On a B&M roller coaster, the way it sits right here, this side would actually be in the frame. You would not see that. And the pin actually goes through the top of the frame and then goes into this, what I call a 2-axis block. B&Ms actually have a name for that block inside there, that little black piece right there. They actually have a name for that, and that name is called a Carden block. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but it's called a Carden block. And the Carden block is simply just that little black block inside there, and it has a hole in this direction and a hole in that direction. Now, one of the super cool things about the B&M Carden block is that the holes, when you look at the side profile of them, here, let me draw it. It's a lot easier to show you. So this is about the size of the Carden block. That's what sits inside the B&M. Now, the vertical pin goes in the back right here. Let me draw you a relief cutout down here poorly. Sorry. In the Carden block, the vertical pin for the B&M goes right here. So this guy would be placed in the back of the coach, where there's a little cubby hole where this guy sits. There's a bushing on the top and the bottom. That way this sits in consumable things. You always want things made out of brass, so it wears before this hardened steel Carden block wears. And then the pin is placed through from the top. Now, a really cool feature about the B&Ms is that the other pin, the 2-axis pin that goes through here, which is where the hitch fork would grab it. All right, so back to my hitch pin right here. So the Carden block, this is the way the block looks internally. The vertical pin goes down here and the horizontal pin goes through right here. Now, if you look at that, you'll notice like either you cut that really poor or that's the way that's supposed to be. It's actually the way it's supposed to be. B&M did a really, really cool thing. They like to safety all their stuff, and safety is by design on rides. You got to remember that. So what happens is that they take their vertical pin. I'm going to call this my vertical pin. Let me crosshatch it real quick. When you take this block and put it into the train, you take your vertical pin, which actually has a notch out of it. It's got a notch missing on one side. There is a chunk missing from the vertical pin. And you're like, what? So, really cool. When you put this guy in the frame and take this guy and put him down inside there, that vertical pin goes all the way down inside of there until it locks into place with the horizontal pin that comes through it. So you have it right there. So once that horizontal pin is installed, you physically can't take the vertical pin out. It won't happen. The only way to take the vertical pin out of the ride is to remove the horizontal pin. Then you could take the vertical pin back out. Isn't that cool? I mean, I love B&M stuff. They do some really cool things. But I thought that was super cool. So you put that in, you put this guy down, that lines the hole up, then you put your horizontal pin through it right there just like that. And that horizontal pin goes through the hitch fork. The hitch fork is really big. It's a really big component. In real life, it's about that big in diameter around. Very heavy, very expensive, but that hitch fork is what holds the other end of the shaft as well. So like, this is what it looks like. I'll try to move this part out. So here is the B&M hitch fork, essentially the way this is. You've got the little fork on the end, and that's where your vertical pin goes through the Carden block assembly. And then it does tapers down, and it's got a consumable bushing right on the front. And then it has a longer longer shaft towards the back. And then right here, this part isn't there, but what you would have is it would be step down threaded with a big nut on the back side. And the nut has a safety plate which locks onto the shaft and prevents the whole thing from turning. Really, really cool assembly, the B&M hitch. That was one of the things I really wanted to do for this video. But I was dragging my feet about it, and it's to the point where it's like, I'm never going to get this done. I wanted to make a mock-up hitch assembly. I have pictures of the stuff, but pictures don't do it justice until you're sitting there holding one of these assemblies, and they're way too expensive to even fabricate out of something else. There's a lot that goes into it. So other hitch styles, I mean, the hitch bars were pretty much used on everything from like locomotive trains all the way down to the basic wooden roller coasters. Those were, again, the earlier styles. The only weird thing that I've ever seen on a ride that was like, why did they do that, was on, of all things, again, because I grew up going to Disney, was Big Thunder Mountain at Disneyland. I'm not sure if the Florida one is the same way, but you would have the hitch bar on Big Thunder. Again, remember there's a universal joint in front and back that allowed that. And then with two hitch bars, you still can't get rotation, right? So they extended it back, and this part sits inside the coach, and that allows it to rotate one way or the other. But then it was really weird. What they did is they extended that hitch even further back, and before they put the nuts on there to hold it, they put a large spring around this guy. This was just a spring wound around there behind the coach. So what that allowed it to do is, as it got onto the chain, they didn't want, it seems like, Arrow didn't want the chain dogs overloaded. They didn't want too much weight because they knew the train was going to be big and heavy. Big Thunder Mountain, although it's not a large train by any means, it's not even heavy, but for the engineering at the time, it was a big, heavy train, and they were worried about it on its chain dogs, I believe. So what they did is they put that spring in there to that when the front coach latches on and starts pulling up the rest of the train onto its chain, the other coaches didn't quite sit on one of the barrels of the chain. So they gave it a spring so that as the tension forward increased on it, it can pull the assembly apart. And as it pulled the assembly apart, the next coach, or two, I think two coaches back, that next chain dog, as it started to expand, would suddenly find the link of the chain and sit on it. So you have, let's say, a train with 3 chain dogs going up that lift hill. I honestly don't know how many Big Thunder has, but you have a train with, let's say, 3 chain dogs going up that lift hill. And while that train is on the lift hill, the 3 chain dogs are actually all locked into the chain. Now, that brings up the question I know I'll get, like, well, wait a minute. Isn't that normal on a ride? Actually, no, it's not. Normally on a ride, when you get up on the lift hill, on a B&M coaster, because they're fed at an exact speed, typically it's the very front of the train. It's that very front chain dog that's latched into a chain. And then as it goes up, the other one, which is further back, is kind of sitting there. It's dropped down into the chain, but it's not actually holding on anything. But if that front one were to break, it might feel like just like a very little tiny jolt as the second one just hits the barrel and it's ready to go. So no, that is not the case with all of them. That's true with most roller coasters, but it sounds like Arrow didn't want that. They wanted all the chain dogs to be touching the entire time, so they put springs in their hitch assemblies to allow the train to literally accordion apart as it was going up a lift hill. I thought that was really interesting, and I've never seen that on anything else. Doesn't mean it's not out there. It's just not something I've seen yet. I'm sure someone will point that out, that it's being used other places. Wouldn't be surprised on other Arrow coasters, but not really what I see. And then the key thing with maintenance on hitches is all about keeping them greased. They need lots of grease to live. These pins, they take a lot of hammering as they go around the track. Every time the train impacts the brakes, the whole train accordions forward, and all these pins are hit and just repeatedly impacted as it goes forward or under acceleration goes backward. The Intamin style, where it's the ball, which is now, I shouldn't say Intamin because now most manufacturers use this because it's so precise. Anything that is launched for sure has one of those because they're honestly much stronger than the 2-axis block is. But these guys, per Intamin, needed to be greased every 8 hours of operation. Every 8 hours of operation, they had to go there and grease it. Now, what was that? It was most of the time, ours was inverted, so on the underside, there was a grease zerk right there. You just put the grease gun on it, squeeze some grease in until it came out on the sides, which was a pain because most people watching this channel have grease stuff, and they know that put grease in, it comes out the sides. Wipe the grease up so it's no longer there. No, you're not good, actually, after that. When you do that, you wipe the grease up and say, okay, it's no longer there. Cycle the train. Train comes back, big globs of grease on the outside of Grin. You have to wipe it off again, cycle the train. Comes back, more grease on the outside. After about the third time of doing that, that's when it finally comes back and it's like, okay, grease isn't coming out. Great. Some people don't understand why that would be a problem because they haven't worked with this scenario on an inverted ride. Not many inverts, right? So on an inverted ride, what you have to worry about on that is the grease coming off of that hitch. The grease comes off, the grease hits the guest down below. Now, we're not worried about messing the guest up, like no one getting injured or anything like that. It is simply just once the grease drops on my brand new pair of pants, I'm pissed off at that point in time. And I want the park to get me new stuff. Now that's between me and the park. At that point, nobody else's business. But that is one of the things. The park doesn't want those complaints. The park doesn't want to have to possibly buy something new for somebody or get involved in legal actions or something like that. So anything that's overhead of guests, they try to keep it extra clean so stuff doesn't actually come off and get on people. It was also something to note on the hitch for the premiere I worked on. They used, just like a hitch bar, they used the universal essentially on the back side and the front side, right? Just like a normal hitch bar would be. But in the center, they actually had this was a two-piece bar that went inside of each other, and there was another bearing on the center. So where the B&Ms and stuff would have your rotational on the hitch side or something like that, it was mounted solid on both sides, and then they put a bearing, kind of like something like that. They would put that bearing in between the two, like that. That way that two could rotate independently. The two could rotate independently like that as it was going around the track. So then they removed the need for a bushing on one side or the other. It could just be a vertical pin in, your 2-axis pins on the side of that, and then this special hitch knuckle in the center that allowed the whole thing to rotate side to side. The only problem with the 2-axis joints and those hitch bars and stuff like that is they do make a lot of noise. They flop around, they clunk and thunk out there. It's not the best thing. So realistically, the best one out there is the spherical rod-end style Heim joint ball bearing. That's the one you want. Typically these rides, we typically don't use anything like roller bearings in the hitch assembly because all that weight and pressure is put onto one little tiny surface right where that roller sits on the inside of the race right there. I don't know if you could see that, but on the inside of the race there's basically, you can see some little vertical indications inside there. Can you see that? I'm not sure. I don't think you can. See some little vertical spots inside of there. Anyways, those little vertical spots, those are the things where this little barrel has been sitting in there like that. These don't like vibration and force in other directions like that. They like to rotate fast. So in something like a hitch where you don't have rotation, even these huge hitches like this, they only rotate just a couple of degrees, not much, in all directions. So these type of bearings are typically not used. They will literally impact themselves into grooves and then break the bearing apart. So we don't use things like these tapered roller bearings inside of hitches. Okay, that's the video for today. Not a very long video, great. But it is one of those things, it's one of the basic things like, hey, I've never done a video on hitches before. Man, I should do a video because that is one of the basic things of a ride, how it's able to twist and articulate going through there. So on a ride like the boomerangs that would use these 2-axis blocks where you have one coach on the front and the other, when the coaches are back to back like that, one thing I should say is that Vekoma, at least, I'm not sure about a lot of other manufacturers. I haven't really seen many with it. But when they use these 2-axis blocks, they also typically put a safety in there as well. And the safety was very simple. It was actually just a steel cable that wrapped around from one side to the other. It literally anchored on the front coach. It will anchor through there and one on each side of that hitch assembly. And the steel cable loops around the other coach and goes through eyelets on the other coach and then comes back to that front one. So that cable is able to articulate and move with the hitch. It also twists and articulates. But if this guy were ever just to flat come apart, that cable would keep the two halves of the ride together at that point. So the cable would be the safety for this. On the hitch bars, I haven't seen many hitch bars safety because if one side of the hitch bar comes apart, it doesn't really do anything. I mean, the coaches can run into each other, sure, but there is no real necessary the front of the coach is going to fall down into the track. No, they're like two independent trains at that point. And then for these style, although I can't speak for manufacturers like Gerstlauer and people like that are using this, and even new Vekomas that use this exact same style, but I know the old Intamins, these pins that went through there, that was considered one of the single point failure items, meaning that if that one pin broke, this would be catastrophic. People would probably die. So that was called a single point failure item. So the single point failure items on the older Intamins, and it's probably true for newer Intamins as well, had a 5-year lifespan on them. Assuming the NDT was okay, non-destructive testing, assuming NDT on those pins every year came out okay, you could only use those pins for 5 years, and then you had to throw them away and buy new ones. Now, that was a lot. I mean, when we did the 5-year replacements for the Impulse Coaster, I think that was like $150,000 worth of pins. And that wasn't all the pins on the ride. That was just the 5-year pins that were deemed a single point failure. So on these style rides where there's just less holding them, these components are typically big and beefy because they have to be much safer than something holding this style hitch together. All right, I think that's going to do it for this video. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. Let me know what type of hitches you've come across or weird things that you'd like to tell people about. People are always digging through the comments on these videos, which is great. This channel's a great learning resource. I do like that. If you want to email me, go ahead and email me at ryantheridemechanic@yahoo.com. I check that quite often. If you want to send pictures and stuff of things that you've seen, I tend to save everyone's pictures that come through there. So if you want credit for those pictures, like before you send me the picture, put your name or channel info or whatever on that picture somewhere. Because if I do that, I'll credit that when I put them in videos. I put them up there and say, hey, this was, you know, this person's video or this person's photo. But if you send me it and people say, oh, I don't care about credit, you know, which is the majority of people, I don't care about credit, then I just save the photo with nothing on it. And then I don't give anybody credit for that just because I don't remember honestly where I got it, because I have so many thousands of pictures for things that sometimes I even look at my pictures and go like, what was I taking a picture of on this? I don't even remember at that point. Okay, I think that's going to do it though. All right, I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Stay off the air gates.